this was sort of my first big lesson. Like, it was my lesson not for me because I know this, but it was my lesson of realizing that not everyone does. So it's kind of important because, you know, fish don't know the water's wet. Oftentimes white people don't realize that we have a race, and oftentimes cis men don't know they have a gender, and it's not the province of just women and trans people. And I think white men in particular, can really consider like what expectations of masculinity they are sort of asked to perform every day that don't align with their values. And I'm saying this because I actually have, with all the men I've talked to for my book, I've talked to people of all backgrounds, but the men I talked to specifically inevitably at some point told me a story about the way masculinity works on their bodies that was pretty upsetting. And the one that like affected me the most was this guy who I spoke to for a podcast. And he told me, he actually was a Wall Street guy, a former Wall Street guy. And he told me that as we were talking, he had this realization that something he had never even told his wife was that the way he holds his body when he walks is like this, and he walks in this very unnatural like way. And it's because when he was young, he was teased for swishing his hips. So he literally contorts his body still as a 40-year-old man because he is afraid of swishing his hips when he walks. And he wasn't even conscious of it totally. He just sort of, as we were talking, was realizing like, oh, that's a thing I do to make sure that people don't call me girly or gay. And I'm still doing it. So I think every person has a gender and should think about how gender works on them. I have a lot of empathy for men, but my empathy only extends to the point of like what you don't know. And I feel like once you know something, then you actually have a responsibility to do something about it. So I think everybody has a gender. And if you didn't know now, you know, before, now you do. Now you can do something about it. It's great. You're all personally accountable. So, I mean, this though, like seriously, in a gentle way, I think it's worth like asking questions like, how does masculinity play out in your life and on your body? I'm speaking to men because I feel like men are the ones who don't know they have a gender, but if you're a woman and you never thought about being a woman before, somehow magically in this culture, like you also can ask these questions. Where do you feel a dissonance between who you are and your values? I actually think that's really important, and I think most of us actually have a pretty good moral internal compass of what's right and wrong, and for me that's where my sort of journey with all this started, was just feeling like I don't feel comfortable with what's being expected of me, so like maybe I can just question that a little bit more. And where do you find yourself saying men are just like that? How are you harmed by your expectations of gender? How do you harm others? I think mainly I just think it's worth having internal, private conversations with yourself and maybe your loved ones about the way gender works in your life. And I think a lot of what we're doing is having these big conversations online, or we're feeling this pressure to sort of communicate publicly these things that we haven't actually thought about, so we don't have a real sense of like what we even feel or mean. And then at the end of the day, you know, whatever you're doing online isn't actually happening in your day-to-day life because you haven't actually thought.